The modern attack surface is vast and permeable, extending from the data center to the cloud and device edge. Security teams are stretched thinner and thinner as they try to cover this ground. The result? More high-profile breaches hit the news every day. Don't let your organization be next. ExtraHop delivers security from the inside out, helping enterprise security teams detect threats up to 95% faster and cut staff time to resolve by 2/3 or more. Act with confidence. Learn more at extrahop.com/securityweekly. Let the team at Black Hills Information Security test your defenses. With over 10 years of experience in penetration testing, red teaming, and threat hunting, the testers at Black Hills will help you find the holes in your security before the bad guys do. The team at Black Hills cares about educating and sharing their knowledge by creating countless blogs, open source tools, and webcasts for you to learn more about the tradecraft of pen testing and red teaming. Visit securityweekly.com/BHIS to join their mailing list and view the latest blogs and webcasts from Black Hills Information Security. Keep your company and products relevant, competitive, and reliable by standardizing your security framework to protect intellectual property, become a reliable business partner, and guard financial and customer information. Standards Connect is an online standards management solution from ANSI. It's Standards Access Simplified. Standards Connect is a cost-saving, fully customizable solution for entrepreneurs and companies that spend $2,000 or more per year on standards and want to translate spend into a subscription model, want to simplify access, search, monitoring, and collaboration, or need a centralized hub of standards for multiple users at one or more locations. Get a free trial at securityweekly.com/ANSI. That's /ANSI.
Welcome back to Business Security Weekly. I am your host, Matt Alderman, joined by Paul Asadorian. Some of you have told us that you're overwhelmed by the amount of content we distribute. In an attempt to make it a little easier for you to find what you're looking for, we've created our new listener interest list. Sign up for the list and select your interest by visiting securityweekly.com/subscribe and clicking the button to join the list. Also, Security Weekly will be at Hacker Halted in Atlanta, Georgia this October 10th and 11th. EC Council is offering our listeners a $100 discount to attend the two-day conference. Use discount code HH19SW when you register or go to securityweekly.com/hackerhalted and register there. Make sure you check out the keynote by our very own Mr. Paul Asadorian and also Mr. Jeff Mann's talk as well. All right, I'm excited about this next guest. Vanessa Van Edwards is lead investigator at Science of People. She is the best-selling author of Captivate, The Science of Succeeding with People. Vanessa shares tangible skills to improve interpersonal communication and leadership, including her insights on how people work. She's developed a science-based framework for understanding different personalities to improve our EQ and help us communicate with colleagues, clients, and customers. She works with entrepreneurs, growing businesses, and trillion-dollar companies, i.e. Apple and or Microsoft, and has been featured on CNN, BBC, CBS, Fast Company Inc., Entrepreneur Magazine, USA Today, The Today Show, and many more, now including Security Weekly. Vanessa, welcome to Business Security Weekly.
Thanks for having me. I'm excited to be here.
So I have to give the audience a little context for this interview. We've covered a few of your articles on the show over the past few weeks, but it's all started with my wife. A few weeks back, my wife was out looking at some of your YouTube videos, really to help her gain confidence in meeting people and in situations and stuff. And so she was showing me some of the content, and I was like, oh my gosh, there's some great stuff here for this audience, which are primarily security leaders, chief information security officers. And I thought, oh my gosh, it would be awesome if you could come on and help us understand leadership success criteria, communications, both verbal and nonverbal. And that's what started this whole process. And your team was awesome, by the way, getting you scheduled. So I really appreciate you coming on.
Oh gosh. Yeah. I mean, it's so great because I think when you're talking about security, even in a digital space, there's so much about it that we're also using our gut, our intuition, our knowledge of nonverbal, the seeing red flags in colleagues or on teams. And so I think there's a definite fit there, and I'm honored to be here.
Now, when I look at leaders, right, in our space, we look at technology leaders, Bill Gates, Steve Jobs, We look at some of our security leaders that we've had in the past. My mentor, Art Coviello from RSA, who did the opening keynote at RSA conference for years, I mean, are just legendary in our industry. But when you look at leaders in general, there's some very interesting kind of secrets to their success that I think other leaders in our space can learn from. And so that's kind of where I want to start, at least the initial part of the interview, and then we'll kind of morph into some of the communication body language stuff.
Great. So, when I first started out, I thought that leadership specifically, you had to be born with it. Either you were born as a natural leader or you weren't, and you couldn't really learn it. Maybe you could try to get a couple of skills, but really if you didn't have it, you didn't have it. And then I read a really interesting study, and this was done by Pierre Balthazard. What he wanted to know is, do leaders think differently? And so he devised a very interesting experimental model where he brought leaders of lots of different industries into his lab, and he scanned their brains in fMRI machines. And he had also asked their colleagues, those leaders, their subordinates, their colleagues, to rank them on their leadership qualities. So when we're looking at leadership qualities, there are things like competence, warmth, charisma. And so all these leaders, he had all their rankings from their subordinates and their colleagues, and then he had their brain scans. And he found that the leaders who had the best rankings from their colleagues and subordinates had very similar brain patterns. In fact, he can look at a brain scan of your brain and tell you with 92% accuracy if you are ranked highly as leader from your peers and your colleagues. This was a mind-blowing study in the industry and as well for me, because what he found was that leaders indeed do think differently. There are specific ways they use their brain. Here's the good news. These brain patterns can be learned. So the brain is very much like a muscle. If you don't ever use your bicep, it's going to get weaker and weaker and weaker. But the moment you start lifting weights and doing those bicep curls, your bicep gets stronger and bigger. It's the same thing with these leadership pathways or patterns. What they found is once you know how to activate those leadership networks, and the more you do them, the more they become ingrained and the easier they are. And that helps you think and act and be more perceived like a leader. So that made me feel a lot better. That's how I frame the leadership discussion.
This is awesome because I'm thinking about like an AI machine learning engine where applicants that come to Security Weekly submit their brain scan and we can figure out if they're a leader or not. Because I read Good to Great, and Good to Great, the message, and I'm sure you've read it, right, is basically to build a successful company, you need to have level 5 leaders. And then so my question was, how do you find level 5 leaders, right? And you just answered that question.
So it's interesting because you asked, how do we find them? So I would maybe offer that we change that question, which is, how do we create them?
Agreed.
So I truly believe that leaders can be created. I have seen my students as new managers, go from never having managed anyone before. We work with a lot of engineers, a lot of very highly technically brilliant people, and they're very technically brilliant, very skilled in computer programming, but they don't have the soft skills side. They don't have the people skills side. They've never managed before as they climb the ranks in their company. And I have seen a totally new manager with no people skills experience go from being one of the most respected, highly rated leaders in their company. So I think that we can create leaders.
No, that's fantastic. I mean, we certainly have that in our field, being very technical, especially in this show. We talk about a lot of the CISOs for corporations today or companies are coming from a technical background and have that challenge, right?
Yeah.
And this show is for not just people who are already in those roles, but people who are aspiring to be in those roles.
Yeah. And that's actually the biggest, kind of going into, so how do you become a leader, right? Like hopefully everyone listening is like, great, I want to be a leader. How do I do it? What we have to think about are the brain areas that were most active for leaders. And the one that I think is the easiest to adopt is nonverbal intelligence. And that's one of the reasons we focus a lot on it. So we do communication, relationship building, and as well, and nonverbal intelligence. Nonverbal is a great skill because it's very much like riding a bike. Once you know how to do it, you always have it. And I think that they are very tangible, practical skills that leaders can use that instantly transform not only their own confidence, but also how others perceive them.
There's a great scene. Have you seen the movie The Godfather?
Yes.
And do you know which scene I'm going to describe probably already, right?
No, tell me.
The scene where they're sitting and they're meeting in like the olive oil, packing facility, and the other mafia boss is basically coming in asking the Godfather for his blessing to sell drugs. And before the Godfather says no, and Ed Scott is pointing this out to me, and I give him credit, that before he says no, Marlon Brando, right, gets up, gets him a fresh cup of coffee, brushes, some like dust off of his leg, and then proceeds to tell him no. And what Ed always told me about that scene is it's not about what he says, it's about his nonverbal communications. And I had never picked up on that until Ed pointed it out.
So what you're talking about from a technical perspective is called micromessaging, and it's so powerful. You're so right. So micromessaging was originally, this idea was discovered by Mary P. Rowe in the 70s. And she was a researcher who looked at how we perceive how people feel about us in the workplace. And she found that what happens is it's often not overt. It's not what we say. So I can say, yeah, I love working with you. I can say that in many different ways, right? So I could say it, I love working with you. I can say, yeah, I love working with you. I can say, I like working with you. Sorry, make it the same verbal. I love working with you. Right? Those are totally different nonverbal messages.
Yeah.
So what she found is that when you're interacting with someone, you're trying to create these groupings of nonverbal messages. So on the positive side, you have what are called micropositives or micro advantages. And these are advantages. So what she found is that when leaders, specifically managers and bosses, give micropositives, it gives these advantages to their employees. So if you like an employee, you like their ideas, you give them tons of micro advantages all the time. More extended eye contact, more nodding, you head tilt when they speak, you angle your body towards them, you point your toes towards them, use a more positive voice tone. I could give you a whole list of them you probably don't even realize are all these messages. And when the receiver is there, they're kind of counting how many advantages am I getting? But here's the key. Everyone else is counting them too. So what happens is a manager will give lots of micro advantages to one employee, and all the other employees feel the micro disadvantage. It's called a micro inequity. So they feel like, oh man, like he's getting more eye contact. She got more smiles. She got more nods. And that immediately makes them feel more insecure in their ideas, less loyal, less engaged. She found that those employees are less happy. They leave more often. They show up to work later. They're later on their projects. They procrastinate more. They're less productive. They're less happy. I mean, like I could go down the list just from that feeling. And intuitively, I think we know this, right? If you go to a birthday party or let's say a holiday party and your boss is literally giving you the cold shoulder, and in a nonverbal world, whenever you angle your body away from someone so that you're not fronting with them, so you're not engaging my forehead, chin, and torso towards you, our brain immediately feels disconnected. You feel snubbed. You literally walk away being like, is she mad at me? Did I say something? Did I do something? And you rack your brain thinking of all those things. So what leaders have to be incredibly aware of is not only giving out more micro advantages all the time, but giving them out equally.
I love this. This the scientific explanation for like the tips that I do when I present or teach, right? That largely came from people like Ed and other more senior instructors. And what I was told when I started teaching for SANS and other places was the best advice. When a student asks a question, engage them. Give them exactly what you're saying, right? Give them eye contact, face them, walk towards them, make them feel comfortable asking the question, give positive feedback. Your question was really good, so that other people can see that and go, oh, if I ask a question, the instructor is going to engage with me, and creates a very positive environment. You just explained the science behind that, which I never knew, but I used that technique. It's really
yes.
funny.
Now I'm going to give I don't usually share this tip, but I want to, I know there's a lot of really advanced people listening. So I'm going to give this extra tip. I always want you to give micro advantages. I want you to give them as equally as possible. It's the best way, it's the best gift we can give to others is giving them wonderful nonverbal. However, really, truly exceptional leaders use micro negatives sometimes too.
Yep.
And they use them in a very powerful way. They use it to be able to share with an employee or a colleague that they don't like something or something isn't going well without having to verbally humiliate, embarrass them, chastise them, say something awkward. I'll give you an example. So we're working, one of our students is a chief information officer, and he wasn't liking one of the projects that his employee was turning in, and it just wasn't the right thing. And he was like, I don't know what to do because I don't want to, she presents in the middle of a big meeting. I don't want to verbally embarrass her. So how do I let her know subtly, softly that I don't agree? And so I actually taught him how to use micro negatives in a way to very softly give back feedback in a much more neutral way, but the nonverbal spoke for himself. And so she came to him afterwards and she said, I think this week I was a little off with the project. Do you think that? And he's like, I think that's right. I think it was a little bit off. What can we do better next week? Because she subtly, either consciously or subconsciously, picked up on it wasn't as enthusiastic as everyone else's response, and it wasn't enthusiastic as his previous responses. And therefore it was an invitation. And I think that micro negatives can be used as an invitation for someone to perhaps very softly recognize, maybe something isn't working here. So that's kind of an advanced way to think about micro messaging.
It's really funny. We do the same thing back to the classroom example. When a student asks questions that are very far off topic or is just interrupting, right? We use the same kind of things, whether it's pointing or whatever the motions are to address their question, but quickly move on, sending them and the other students the message that like, we have to stay on topic. We can't have too many questions and we don't, want to go off on a tangent all the time.
Right. So these are tools, right? For everyone watching, every nonverbal gesture is a tool. So you should have a list. We give these to all of our students. You should have a list of every micro positive and every micro negative, and they're just in your toolbox. So I do live office hours with all of our students, and we have students that sometimes share very deep personal stories. And as you know, that's very, very hard when you're trying to answer a lot of questions and do a lot of presenting. And so I have a list of micro negatives that I use to say, I hear your question, but we're going to try to move on from it. So you should have those in your back pocket as well.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
The same thing from a presentation perspective.
Oh yeah, same setting. Yep.
It's right. I mean, it's easier, when you're in a classroom setting, it's one thing, but when you're in a large audience and you're trying to engage with the audience, some of those same things have to happen, right? You have to address the whole audience during your presentation. Otherwise, you're going to lose them, right? And if they go off, then your message isn't getting across. And so I've gone through lots of speaker training over the years through the different things that I've done. And you share a lot of those tips in some of your videos, Vanessa, of, these are the types of things to do to help keep that audience engaged and show that you're interested in them. And then you'll get that kind of, that reciprocal is delivering the message out.
Yeah. Mutual engagement for sure.
Yeah, exactly. So as we think about so you get into a lot of body language components, which I like because I'm probably bad at this sometimes. Going back to the story about anybody can learn to lead, right? If you would have gone back to me in high school and said that I would be on a podcast network weekly, talking to an audience and being coherent, I mean, no way. I remember my first presentation in high school. I think they counted like 40 some right? I was just nervous. I was a wreck. I was
in the same boat, Matt. I was in the same boat. Same thing. Yep.
But I've learned over the years.
Same thing.
Yeah. So
it is a learned skill. When I did it, I was teaching, seminars at the university about security, and that was kind of like my training ground. I kind of just learned as I went. And when you said you can like build those pathways for leadership, presenting and communication, I think is another pathway, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah. And so I want you to help us identify what are some of those body language things that we should know about, and how do we improve those and make sure that we're doing a better job, not only with our verbal communication, because I think that's a huge gap sometimes in our industry and something needed, but also the body language, the nonverbal stuff. Where are some tips and tricks to help
because I feel like I talk with my hands because I'm Italian, and I feel like people that just listen missed like half of what I'm saying.
Yeah. So actually, let's talk about hands, because I could talk for hours about nonverbal tips for leaders, but my favorite one, I think also the most easily accessible one that you can use right away, is with hand gestures. So there's actually a lot of robust research on hand gestures. And we think of our hands, I think, separate from our thinking, separate from our communication. But there's all kinds of research that was done by Susan Goldwyn-Meadow, who found that you have a harder time telling a story if you can't use your hands. In other words, there is a feedback loop with your hands and your words. And they are very, very essential for charisma. So I did some research on TED Talks. I don't know if you watch TED Talks, but I am a TED Talk junkie. I watch every TED Talk every day at lunch. And I was searching the TED website for talks on leadership because I love leadership as a topic. And I saw that there was 2 talks that popped up. One was by Simon Sinek. Many of you have probably seen it. I think at the time it had over 40 million views. And the other talk was by Fields Wicker-Murin. Most people haven't heard of that talk. I looked at these talks and they were both 18 minutes long, and they both were published the same month of the same year. And they had almost the same title. And they were both really good talks, but one talk went viral and one didn't. And I wondered what makes a TED Talk go viral. Here are all these experts, all these very curated, beautiful videos, but some shoot to the millions and some stay under 100,000. So in our lab, we did a massive research experiment on TED Talks. And this actually got me my own TED Talk, this research, because we discovered something very interesting, which was that the most popular TED Talkers, and this is just by view count. So if you just look at view count, the most viewed TED Talks, if you count every single hand gesture, they use an average of 472 hand gestures in 18 minutes. Whereas the least popular TED Talks use an average of 460 hand gestures. Sorry, so it's 472 and 260. So it's almost half.
Wow.
What this means is that people who are really charismatic, they're speaking to you on 2 tracks. The best of the best speakers know their content so well that they can verbally explain it very clearly and very precisely. And they can also use the words to demonstrate concepts. So what I explained in my TED Talk is if I were to say, I have a really big idea and hold up my fingers in a really small gesture as if I'm holding a penny, your brain is confused. Your brain sometimes even laughs. You're like, Vanessa, it's not a big idea. Look how small it is. It's as small as a penny. And they found that our words are less powerful than our gestures. We actually give more weight to our hand gestures. And so they are, as a leader, one of the best things you can do is not only know your content so well that you can speak on 2 tracks, but think about how you can integrate your hand gestures with your words so that people can see it. Like I just use the word integrate. And you can see that I used a very soft hand gesture showing my fingers interlacing. That's a really nice way for me to help your brain actually visualize an integration. And so any way that you can emphasize or non-verbally script your words, it can really, really help make your message more dynamic.
I love that because it's more tips that I've gotten over the years about presenting and Matt, speaker training and mentorship. But having the science behind it's really interesting with the TED Talks. I like that.
Mm-hmm. And I give some funny examples in the TED Talk as well. You're welcome to check it out. But that's the basic gist of it, that our hands are these really powerful, beautiful weapons that we don't even think of for our charisma, and they're so easy to use. Oh, and the most basic is forget hand gestures if you have to just take your hands out of your pocket. So level 1 is just having them visible.
Yep. That's
right?
hard at first. Yeah.
Just that. If you can just pull them out of your pocket when you're on stage presenting, never put your hand in your pocket. Actually, a lot of my speakers that I train, I have them put sandpaper in their pocket so that the moment they put their hands in their pocket, they feel it. Mm-hmm. So the very first thing is just visible. Above the desk, in shot, like you'll notice that I've moved my computer so that you can see where my hand gestures are. The biggest mistake that presenters often make is they have their screen in front of them so that we can't see their hand gestures, or they come too close. So they present that they're like this, and then they just see the tops of fingers. So even when you're presenting, visible as much as possible.
And I was,
which means I got to back the camera up a little more.
Well, yeah. And when you're presenting, whether, it's in a boardroom or a meeting room or in front of an audience, I never stand behind a podium. Like ever.
Amen.
Ever.
Amen.
Right? Ever. That was one of the first tips that folks had given me was never stand behind the podium. And if you can, never even stand up stage. Walk in the aisles to be more interactive. Now you're going to explain the science behind it, I would imagine, but that's like what I was told. I was like, wow, this works. This is great. I feel more comfortable and connected with my audience. And that was a tip. What I love about this interview is I'm learning exactly why.
100%. And people who are naturally already using some of these tips will feel very vindicated, like, aha, that's why I do that. And that will also make it more purposeful. So one of the things I try to encourage is, I don't know if we have any struggling perfectionists listening. I'm very much a struggling perfectionist. And so perfectionists get in their own way a lot when it comes to communication. It's first of all, communicating perfectly is impossible. There is no such thing. And so we try to have the perfect body language, the perfect speech, the perfect resume, the perfect interview answers. And when we do that, it actually makes us get in our own head. It makes us even more anxious and also makes us much less authentic because we're worrying about being more perfect as opposed to being engaging or real. And so when we think about interacting, I'd much rather you think about it instead of perfect, it's purposefully. So not perfectly, but purposefully. And so once you know the reason behind some of these things, it helps you leverage your hand gestures purposefully. We even have a list, you're welcome to use it on our website, of the 7 hand gestures you should be using. They're my favorite hand gestures that we see in TED Talks all the time. Purpose. You don't have to use those perfectly. You don't have to use them all the time, but just think about the ones you want to use and use them with intention.
Now, Vanessa, I got to ask, kind of a segue into body language, and something I've been coached on as well when you present in really any setting is how you dress. And not just like whether you're dressed up or not, but like right down to the details of exactly how you dress for your audience, but also the colors that you wear too. Have you done any research into that?
So we did a little bit of research into color psychology. By the way, we did actually look at colors in our TED Talk experiment. So color was one of the variables that we looked at. Like we wanted to see, was there any was blue a better color than black or than white? And we didn't find any in our TED Talk experiment, but there is a lot of research on color psychology that when we see a certain color, it reminds us of a certain thing. I like the research on color psychology. We have a guide on it on our website, which you can check out. What I would much rather is that your colors are purposeful with your branding, because colors, why they're powerful is they often remind us of something else. So for example, if you look into color psychology, the color blue is wisdom, it's loyalty, it's stability. Why? Because blue reminds us of a blue sky. And when there's a blue sky, it's a good weather day. Our crops go well. Going back to our evolutionary ancestors, we like to have a sunny day because it was easier to hunt and our crops grew. So it just reminds us of a blue sky. I like people to use colors purposefully. I'll give you an example if it's helpful. So when we were choosing our book cover, my book cover, the publisher told me, we really want to pick a color that you can kind of dominate, and that will be your color. I had never thought about it that way with a cover, because most covers for many years were like a white background with a single object in the middle. Right? Like that was like every book ever for 10 years. And so we decided to go with blue because obviously it reminds you of wisdom and loyalty in the sky. We call it Captivate Blue, which is the title of the book. So for my TED Talk, I decided to wear Captivate Blue. For our biggest branding positions, I wear that same Captivate Blue. That's not really because necessarily blue is a wisdom color, but rather I want it to remind you of my other brand assets. So when you're thinking about what you want to wear, I would say, what do you want it to remind them of? Something of yours, something of theirs, a bigger brand. If I'm really feeling special, when I do a corporate presentation, I actually wear their corporate color if I can.
Right.
Because I don't want them to think about my brand. I want them to think about their brand.
We were always told that the first day of teaching or presenting that you wear red, because there was something about red. It was a powerful color or something like that, right?
Red.
Is there science behind that? Because I always, when I would teach, I'd wear red in the first day.
So red is the color of passion. It's the color. It's color of intensity. It's very high energy. So when you're thinking about colors, the other scientific basis is UV waves, the wavelength. Red has a more energetic wavelength.
Yeah.
I don't know. I'm sorry if I'm using the wrong words on here, but it's a higher energy color based on wavelength. So it makes sense that as a teacher, you'd want to be at the highest wavelength possible, the biggest energy possible in your first impression.
Paul, that means you and I should be wearing a lot more black, red, and white because that's weekly.
Yeah. I'm going to plan my outfit accordingly for next week.
You have black, red, and white on your computer.
That's right.
We do.
Yeah.
We have a lot of that. I wear a lot of blue because my blue eyes. My wife thinks my blue eyes pop more when I wear my blue. So
we do love symmetry.
Lots of winds.
That's why we match our lipstick. My lipstick matches my shirt. We love symmetry in bodies. So you're absolutely your wife is right. Tell her she's right.
Okay, she's always right. By the way,
true. This is true.
This is the way we roll.
So, Vanessa, for those leaders or aspiring leaders that are either presenting or interacting, with their now newfound team, perhaps, what are some body language things to avoid other than hands in the pockets?
I have to leave like any minute because I have another podcast recording.
Okay.
I can do this last one. Should we try this last one?
Let's do that. Yeah, because I have a hard stop as well.
Okay, cool. Sorry, will you ask that one again?
So, what are some body language things to avoid when you're presenting or interacting with your team as a leader?
Yes. So this brings us a little bit back around to micro negatives. So with speaking specifically and presenting, what you want to do is offer every opportunity for your audience to focus on your message, right? So unless you're presenting all about you as a speaker, you're presenting about your message, right? You're teaching something, they're learning something, you have a new strategy, a new tool. So you actually want to take emphasis away from you and put it all in the message. That means that all of your nonverbal should be aligned with the message. So your hand gestures should be underlining the verbal points you're making. You also want to make sure that your movement is purposeful. So instead of pacing the stage or going out to the audience for no reason, you actually want to make your movement tied with the content. So for example, I will typically start my presentations on the left side of the stage. And when I move to a different point, I will move to the right side of the stage. So I use my stage movement as a cue to my audience that
That's a
we're
great
moving
tip.
on from a different point.
Yep.
When I'm going out into the audience, it's a great way of having movement. It's only when I have an activity that I want people to get personal. I want to hear from them.
Yeah.
I want them to think about their own experience. So it's how can you align your nonverbal with your message? That's the best way you can do it.
I love that.
That's great. Vanessa, website scienceofpeople.com, right? If people want to get some more resources there.
Yes, please. We have everything on there, videos, articles. Hopefully I'll get you sucked in and you'll stay reading forever.
That's awesome. Vanessa, thank you so much for joining us on Business Security Weekly.
Thanks, Vanessa.
Thanks so much for having me.
And thank you everyone for joining us. We'll see you next week on Business Security Weekly.